Welcome to the channel where powerful stories come to life. Get ready for truth, emotion, and transformation, one story at a time. Have you ever imagined walking into your own restaurant and leaving with a heavy heart? Not because of poor sales, but because of secondhand shame? That's exactly what happened to Camila, co-owner, founder, visionary woman, yet treated as invisible because she chose to walk in dressed simply. The waiter didn't even blink before speaking loudly to customers, snapping harsh responses and acting as if kindness was a waste of time. This story might sound absurd, but it happens every day, maybe even where you work or eat. And the most surprising part? The change didn't begin with mass firings, but with something far more powerful: strategic silence and genuine listening. Because true leaders know that real impact begins where the eye doesn't reach. And today you'll discover how one quiet visit turned into a silent revolution. The restaurant was full, but the issue wasn't the crowd. It was the tone. Camila entered as if she were just another customer. Plain jeans, a neutral blouse, messy hair tied in a bun. No sign of authority, no boss-like posture. And that's precisely what allowed her to see everything with clarity. Around her, customers received impatient looks, dry interruptions, and curt remarks, as if courtesy had been removed from the menu. Daniel, the waiter, seemed to measure time in bursts of impatience. He spoke loudly, cut off orders midway, and made it clear with both body and words that he wasn't there to listen. An elderly woman asked for a sandwich without mayo and got, "That slows everything down," as a reply. Ever experienced service where it feels like you're bothering the staff? Sadly, it's not uncommon, and it's in these small moments that stories of disrespect take root. Camila, seated in a corner, didn't pick up her phone or raise her voice. She watched, took mental notes, and wondered, how many stories have passed through here, lost to the lack of listening? Instead of confronting anyone immediately, she chose to listen to the restaurant like someone hearing a disguised cry for help. Because sometimes what looks like haste is just poorly masked apathy, and when rushing becomes routine, the next step often comes as a shock. The diner was born from a void, not financial, but emotional. Camila and her wife Anna faced more than bills and job rejections. They faced judgmental looks, closed doors, and silences that screamed prejudice. From that reality, they decided to build something different. A space where the stories of those who serve and those who eat could meet without hierarchy. A place where respect was the main seasoning, not just a decorative word on the wall. They started with 2 second-hand stoves, a borrowed fridge, and an unshakable conviction: treat people like people. It wasn't about trendy burgers or fancy milkshakes. It was about looking customers in the eye, remembering their names, and genuinely asking if everything was okay. Ever seen a server remember a kid's birthday? That kind of loyalty can't be bought with marketing. And that's how this little diner became the stage for big stories. The restaurant's name? With Soul. And it was no accident. It carried everything Camila and Anna wanted to express without waving flags. Here, every service should be done with soul. Every gesture, every smile, every attentive silence. But like any philosophy, it needs to be nurtured daily, or it fades. And that day, amid the noise, Camila realized something essential was slipping away. Camila could have stood up right then, slammed the table, and shouted, "I'm the owner." But she didn't. Because when the truth is solid, it doesn't need to be screamed. It waits for the right moment to be heard. So she simply smiled faintly, ordered a basic combo, and stayed quiet, listening more than speaking. Every tense expression, every embarrassed customer, every hurried movement, all of them were telling stories that needed to be heard with attention. As she chewed slowly, Camila wondered, when did speed swallow kindness? The waiter looked like he was battling his own shift, as if every order were a personal insult. She noticed the discomfort in a young couple who gave up on ordering, the quiet tears of a mother trying to calm her kids. It's in those details, the ones people pretend not to see, that the most honest stories hide, waiting for someone capable of truly listening. She pulled a small notebook from her bag, scribbled phrases: impatient look, harsh interruption, rudeness masked as urgency. It wasn't revenge, it was diagnosis. Like a doctor observing symptoms before prescribing a cure, Camila was reading the room. Because those who build with purpose know silence, when used wisely, is a powerful tool for change. But sometimes, it must be interrupted by the gaze of someone watching from the outside. Not every impact starts with a speech. Sometimes, it starts with a click. 2 tables ahead, A customer was watching the same scene, with a phone in hand. He saw the exact moment Daniel, the waiter, leaned impatiently over a mother with two small kids and said loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear, "If you can't decide, come back when you can." The words hit like an invisible slap. But the strongest stories often gain power when someone chooses to record the absurd. Unaware that she was the co-owner, the customer recorded discreetly, not out of revenge, but out of outrage. Have you ever witnessed something so wrong it felt like it hurt your own skin? The mother was speechless, eyes welled up. Her children looked down. The video was posted on the spot, with a raw caption, "Inhumane service. What kind of place treats people this way?" Within an hour, it had spread online, and the stories began multiplying. Comments exploded like popcorn in a hot pan. "That happened to me too. I'm never going back. This waiter needs training or to be fired." The algorithm did the rest. Collective outrage found its echo, and what was supposed to be just another lunch became a headline on corporate values. And Camila, still seated, saw the opportunity she'd been waiting for, because sometimes change needs an external lens to expose what's been screaming from within. The next day, something changed. What had been just a woman sitting in the corner was now a presence. Camila entered the diner with the same simplicity, but now wearing a name badge that made all the difference: co-owner. Small on her chest, huge in its meaning. She walked through the restaurant without rush, greeting with her eyes. No drama, no speech, just the certainty that this moment wouldn't be forgotten. Those who saw her knew this wasn't a returning customer. It was the founder coming back with purpose. Some staff chuckled over a joke, others stared at their phones. But when she called a team meeting and turned on the wall TV, everything changed. The lively room fell silent with an invisible snap. The video started playing, and with it, the discomfort crept in. Because some stories don't need background music to hit hard. They don't need editing to stir emotions, they just need to be real. And there they were, the ignored customers' expressions, eyes lost among trays in rush. And at the center of it all, Daniel. The same Daniel who, a day before, had spoken loudly, cut off customers, and used urgency as a license for disrespect. On screen, his impatient face, harsh gestures. No one needed to point fingers. The discomfort was mutual. Camila's question came seconds later, with the calm of someone who seeks awareness, not blame. Is this the kind of service we want to offer? The room stayed silent. Because when a mirror shows what we pretend not to see, answers don't come easy. That was the power of that moment. Camila didn't shout, accuse, or shame. She simply showed, like a mirror with no filter. A reminder that speed, unchecked, steals our humanity. The video continued. Details once lost in the chaos of daily routines now had weight. The elderly woman waiting for a simple, "Good afternoon," the young man interrupted 3 times mid-order. The waiter treating customers mechanically, as if timing his smiles. It was as if each scene asked, "Do you see this?" And this time, they did. For the first time, they truly did. Camila paused the video, looked around. No one held her gaze for long. Still, she pressed on, with the soft strength of someone who leads by example. "I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to remind you where we came from and why we started." And then she shared how she and Anna had once served customers with their own hands, how each burger was a gesture of care, how listening meant more than speed. She told the stories that inspired them to open the place. The girl with autism who only felt safe eating there. The grandfather who brought his grandson every Saturday as a ritual of affection. Those stories gave meaning to the work, and in some ways, had been forgotten. She took the reflection deeper, asked, "How many times have you left a place feeling unseen?" And added, "How many times have you made someone else feel that way?" Daniel, who once crossed his arms with arrogance, now lowered his eyes to the floor. There was no escape. He stood before himself, not just the man who works and goes home, but the one who, unknowingly, could shatter someone's self-worth with a single impatient gesture. Camila knew change wouldn't come from scolding. She knew great stories of transformation begin with discomfort, but bloom through purpose. So instead of punishment, she offered commitment, a new pact with service, with respect, with listening, and more than anything, with the stories that enter that restaurant every day, carrying pain, memories, and hope. And she left them with one final question. What if it had been your mother sitting there? Your son? Your grandfather? Would you have treated them the same? That question lingered. It didn't need an answer, because in that moment everyone understood. Every customer matters to someone, and if you can't see that, maybe you haven't truly learned what it means to serve. When the meeting ended, Camilla turned off the TV. The silence lingered for a few moments longer, but it was a different kind of silence now, no longer awkward but reflective. People were thinking, revisiting their own behavior, mentally rewriting their routines. Because in the end, that's how new stories are born, when we allow ourselves to see what has always been there, only hidden by the rush of daily life. In the days that followed, something beautiful began to happen. Daniel started to change, not in a sudden or dramatic way, but in the details, in the way he asked questions, the way he listened, the way he served. He began to remember the name of the woman who always ordered grape juice. He started asking about the son of the customer who always came in a hurry. He began to realize that serving isn't just a task, it's a connection, a bridge between two stories that briefly cross paths, but can leave lasting marks. The entire team began holding themselves more accountable. They created invisible codes of kindness among themselves. One would remind the other. They would lift each other up. And suddenly, that little diner went back to being what it was always meant to be, a space of care, of listening, of respect. The video from that meeting was never posted on social media. It never went viral, but it became an internal legend, a silent milestone that marked the before and after of that team. And more importantly, it showed that every business, every team, every group needs conscious pauses, unfiltered mirrors, truths spoken with love. Because people don't change by being yelled at. They change when they truly see themselves. Daniel used to cross his arms like building a wall, an automatic gesture but a symbolic one. Arms locked, chest puffed out, voice impatient. To him, it was just another day at work, a busy shift, demanding customers, a routine already pushing him to his limit. When confronted about his behavior, he responded with something many have said, and maybe you've even thought before. Customers need to learn, as if impatience taught, as if rudeness educated, as if being in a rush justified everything. But it was there, right in the middle of that dining room, that one of the most powerful stories of transformation began to be written. Camila, dressed simply, had gone unnoticed by him. Sitting quietly in a corner of the diner, she was observing everything, not as a customer but as the co-founder of the place. She saw the waiter raise his voice at an elderly woman, rush a young couple, dismiss a request with visible impatience, and when she herself tried to engage in a more human way, she received a blank stare, as if she weren't even there. She was treated like a burden, as if asking politely was a problem. She felt what no customer should ever feel, invisibility. But Camilla didn't react with yelling or accusations. She waited, and at the end of the shift, with the place quieter and the atmosphere lighter, she approached him. She looked Daniel in the eyes with the calm of someone who's faced much worse than a difficult shift, and she said firmly, "I was the customer, the one in the corner, the one you barely looked at." And in that instant, it was like the ground vanished beneath Daniel's feet, because some stories begin with a gesture, others with a jolt of reality. The noise from the kitchen faded into the background. Other employees, once distracted by their tasks, now stood still. It wasn't a lecture, it was a lesson. A class without slides, without manuals, without shouting. Daniel was speechless. And there, in that deeply uncomfortable moment no one wants to feel, his real growth began. Because deep down, we only truly change when we're pushed out of our comfort zone. And every story of transformation requires a little pain. A bruised ego here, a crack in pride there. That's how something new begins. Camilla didn't make a scene. She performed an emotional audit. One by one, she described the gestures that hurt, the cutting tone, the imposed rush, the absent look. She explained how each of those actions didn't just affect the customers, they influenced the team's morale, the brand's reputation, and the very soul of the business she helped build. And most importantly, she wasn't speaking to humiliate. She was speaking to teach, and that changes everything, because some people shout to show power, others speak softly to show awareness. And it's those calmer voices that shape the strongest stories. Daniel listened, and it was hard, but he listened. For the first time in a long time, he lowered his arms. The wall crumbled, and in place of defensiveness, something far rarer appeared, listening. Camilla then proposed something no one expected, Not a dismissal, not a public punishment, but an invitation, a new internal development program, a different process, designed not to punish, but to awaken, to turn mistakes into stepping stones. Because every story of redemption begins with a choice, to keep pretending nothing happened, or to use the mistake as a starting point. Daniel agreed. Hesitantly, yes. He thought it would just be another boring lecture or a cheesy motivational video. But what he found was very different. Instead of speeches, there were open conversations. Instead of instructions, real experiences. In one of the first sessions, he heard the testimony of a former hotel manager who now lived on the streets after a series of losses and a deep depression. And that man said a sentence that stuck with Daniel. What hurts the most isn't hunger, it's being ignored. That hit deep, because true stories have that power. They don't ask for permission. They just enter. Over time, Daniel began to change. Slowly, he started asking customers' names, remembering their preferences, offering water kindly before they ordered. Small gestures, but big transformations. He realized that service isn't a task. It's a relationship. It's not about handing over food quickly. It's about being present. And the most beautiful part? He began sharing his own discoveries with his coworkers. He spoke about how he now saw each customer as a chapter, how he started listening without rushing, how finally he understood the value of the stories that enter and leave that diner every day. Daniel's transformation began to spread, in a good way. His coworkers were inspired. Leadership took notice. The diner, once scarred by an episode of disrespect, was now becoming a symbol of cultural transformation. And all of this didn't happen because someone was punished, but because someone was heard. Camila had the courage to confront with empathy. Daniel had the humility to learn from his mistake. And together they rewrote a story that could have ended in disgrace, but turned into an example. Have you ever stopped to think about the power of a story poorly told? And what happens when that story, instead of being buried, is used as fuel for real change? That's exactly what happened in this diner, where a customer was humiliated, without anyone realizing that she was in fact the co-founder of the place. What should have been just another order at the register became headline news, and what could have been buried as a misunderstanding turned into a national example of how to handle mistakes with dignity. Today you'll understand why this story moved so many people, and maybe it will move you to change as well. It all started with a short video recorded by a customer who was there by chance. In it, Camila, co-owner of the diner, appears dressed simply, being mistreated by a visibly impatient waiter. His voice was loud, sharp, almost like a sonic shove. He barely let her speak. The detail? Camila didn't identify herself as the owner. She was there discreetly observing the service. Hours later, the video landed in the hands of a local reporter. One viewing was enough for her to say, "This story needs to be told." And from then on, the diner's phone didn't stop ringing. News outlets, influencers, radio hosts, everyone wanted to understand how a place that always promoted empathy and inclusion could have allowed such a disrespectful scene to unfold. The headline, printed in bold letters, said it all. Customer humiliated was actually the co-owner. And with that, what was just a combo meal of burger, fries, and juice turned into the symbol of an institutional crisis. The reaction was instant. On one side, people were outraged by the waiter's rudeness. On the other, some questioned how the co-owners allowed such behavior to happen in the first place. Comments flooded social media. How could they let this happen? Is this what humanized service really looks like? If she were someone else, would he have done the same? The image of the diner, built so carefully over time, now seemed to be crumbling in the court of public opinion. And that's when Camila realized that hiding would solve nothing. Because the stories that teach us the most are the ones we face, even with shame, even with fear. She knew that trying to extinguish the fire with cold, generic press releases would only deepen the gap. So she decided to do the opposite of what most businesses would in a crisis. She didn't deny it, didn't blame others, didn't minimize what happened. She chose to turn shame into lesson. Because some stories are like that, harsh in the beginning but essential to wake up those asleep in comfort zones. Camila called a meeting with the entire staff. She sat down with each employee, looked them in the eye, and said clearly, "We made a mistake, and we're not going to hide it. We're going to learn from it." She got straight to the point. No scapegoats. The goal was different: to build awareness, not punishment. she decided to launch a new phase in the business, a project called Stories That Transform. Weekly meetings where employees would listen to real-life accounts from people who had once felt invisible in customer service experiences. People whose days were ruined by a harsh comment or a look of disdain. The waiter in question, he was invited to attend every session, not as a defendant, but as someone in progress. Videos from the meetings started to circulate. Employees crying as they listened, sincere hugs after tough conversations, and an environment that, little by little, was being restored. The very journalist who had first reported the story published a follow-up titled, "The Diner That Became a School of Empathy." The change was even felt in the atmosphere. The dining area, once ruled by haste, adopted a new rhythm. Customers were now called by name. A mural was created with the phrase, "Every person carries a story. Treat them with kindness." The walls, once merely decorative, now displayed handwritten thank you notes from customers who felt the difference. The waiter who had been at the center of the initial incident was one of those who changed the most. During one of the listening circles, he said, "I never realized the impact of my words. I always thought service was just about efficiency, but I've come to understand it's about presence." That sentence echoed, and eventually became the slogan of a company campaign. The most beautiful part? Watching the team become the driving force of change. They themselves began to propose improvements. Ideas surfaced like offering water before the order, asking how the customer was feeling, or simply giving a genuine smile. Because sometimes what saves someone's day isn't the meal, it's the look in your eyes. The impact of this new phase was so positive that the diner began receiving visits from other entrepreneurs wanting to understand the process. What was once seen as a scandal became a case study in overcoming and responsibility. TV shows, leadership events, and even universities began citing the example of a diner that chose to educate rather than conceal. Camila was invited to give talks. She shared the story with other women entrepreneurs, showing that it's not the absence of failure that builds a respectable brand, but the way we respond to it. She said something that became a motto among the team. To err is human. To learn from it is humanity at its highest level. And so, a crisis that could have buried a business became its greatest strength, all because someone decided that every story deserves more than judgment. It deserves listening, reflection, and action. Firing him would have been easy, even popular. Just a quick internal statement, a boilerplate phrase like, "His behavior does not reflect our company values," a cold, formal email. Done, reputation preserved, case closed. But Camila didn't want to close anything. She wanted to open, to expand, to heal. Because in that restaurant, each employee wasn't just a role, they were a walking story. And Daniel, despite his serious mistake, had one too. He had been harsh with an elderly woman. A sharp tone, an impatient look, as if she were just another complicated order on a rushed morning. Customers noticed. Colleagues felt it. The woman lowered her gaze and quietly whispered her order, trying not to be a bother. Just another poorly handled interaction. Or was it the turning point for something much bigger? Camila, the manager, or rather the guardian of that place, heard about it minutes later. She could have chosen the usual route, but she didn't. She believed in second chances, in rewriting stories before discarding them. So she called Daniel for a conversation. No yelling, no threats, just an invitation. "I want you to join a new program of ours, but I must warn you, there are no slides or lectures, there's people, and truth, and maybe pain." Daniel hesitated, thought it was just punishment disguised as learning, but he agreed, and that was the beginning of the most challenging and transformative part of his journey. On the very first day, he was taken to a shelter for people experiencing homelessness, people invisible in the rush of the world, and there, he met Marcos. Marcos didn't ask for money. He didn't play the victim. He shared. He was a former luxury hotel manager, fluent in 3 languages. He lost everything during a severe depressive episode. Friends distanced themselves. Family didn't know how to help. The firing was only the start of the fall. Within months, he was sleeping on park benches. The hardest part? It's not the hunger that hurts. It's the gaze that slices through you as if you don't exist. Daniel said nothing. For the first time in a long while, he listened with his whole body. He listened with his eyes. That moment stayed with him, not as guilt, but as an awakening. From then on, the program intensified. Camila accompanied him personally, No delegating transformation. It was something she insisted on living alongside him. There were listening circles with single mothers fighting twice as hard for the basics. Young people with disabilities who'd heard all their lives that they weren't good for anything. Elderly folks who only got attention when they were shortchanged. And in that space of active listening, Daniel didn't talk much, but his eyes changed. His tone of voice, too. He began to understand that empathy isn't taught with slides. It's cultivated through presence. Camila saw it. She noticed how he began anticipating customers' needs. Not with haste, but with care. He started remembering names, noticed when someone looked sad, offered a glass of water before even handing over the menu. And when coworkers complained, he'd say, "We don't know the story behind the person across from us, let's slow down." The restaurant changed too. Slowly, the staff began sharing their experiences with each other. Some got emotional. Others, for the first time, opened up about their own scars. And that became the culture. Not a culture of manuals, but of humanity. That restaurant started serving more than meals. It began serving presence. Customers came back, not for the flavor, but for the feeling of being seen, of truly being heard. And many didn't even know that it had all started with a mistake, a misstep, a bad service moment, because instead of discarding the old Daniel, Camila bet on who he could become. She believed that every story, no matter how bitter its beginning, could be rewritten with awareness. One day, a customer left a note on the counter. "I don't know the name of the guy who helped me. I just know he changed my day. He listened to me like even my own family doesn't. Thank you for that." Camila kept the note, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Transforming people is always harder than replacing them, but it's also infinitely more powerful. Daniel, who once saw customer service as a burden, now welcomes new employees. He shares his experiences, speaks with humility about what he learned, and he always ends each session with the same sentence. "The best dish we can serve here is respect, because those who sit at our table bring more than hunger. They bring a whole story." Today, the restaurant has a mural, not of photos, but of phrases left by those who were touched there. Simple notes, but profound. And at the top, there's one sentence that says it all. "Here, we even listen to silence." Have you ever stopped to consider that the deepest transformations aren't born from decrees, reforms, or flashy speeches? They don't come with golden badges or slogans on the walls. They begin in the invisible, in the intimate, within us. That's why true change doesn't happen from the outside in, but precisely the other way around. And this story is living proof of that. At the heart of this narrative is Daniel, an ordinary guy, the kind most people wouldn't notice. He'd been working at the diner for a while, fast, efficient, but always in a hurry. Every order was a number, every customer, a task. His focus was on performance, and nothing more. After all, isn't that what the world demanded? But something began to change. It wasn't sudden, it was gradual. Maybe it was a word that stuck, a look that unsettled, a silence that screamed. Daniel began to realize there was something wrong with that rushed routine. He saw that he wasn't truly serving people. He was just delivering orders. And that comes at a cost we often only understand when our soul starts to collect the bill. So quietly, he began to slow his pace. Instead of just asking, "Want fries with that?" he started asking, "How was your day?" He began remembering the name of the lady who always ordered grape juice. He started asking if her son had recovered from the flu. He began offering a glass of water before taking the order, this time with a genuine smile, not a mechanical one. Small gestures, but ones that rewrote powerful stories. During one of the training sessions led by Camila and Anna, something hit him deeply. The topic was empathy and service, but it was one testimony that froze the room. One of the speakers, a man experiencing homelessness, said with teary eyes, "What hurts most isn't hunger, it's not being seen." That phrase cut deep, and it stayed. Daniel kept repeating that line in his head for days. He began looking at customers, co-workers, delivery drivers, with a different gaze. And it wasn't just with his eyes. It was a look full of respect, of presence, of humanity. Something shifted inside. When we internalize a truth like that, even the way we walk changes. And it did. Daniel started walking more slowly, listening more, responding with calm, not out of protocol, but because he finally understood the value of the stories behind each face. The curious part? No one had to say a word. The team noticed on their own. Daniel, once seen as just another coworker, became a reference, a mirror. Smiles started lasting longer. Break time conversations became lighter. Some began imitating him, offering coffee to delivery drivers, asking customers how they were doing, even when the line was long. And the most beautiful part? Daniel began to see his colleagues with different eyes too. The cashier, once just an employee, was now Mariana, a single mom of two, who arrived 30 minutes early every day to provide for her children with dignity. The quiet guy in the kitchen was Louise, who dreamed of opening his own business, but hadn't yet found the courage. The stories revealed themselves, not because someone asked, but because someone listened. And so in this almost silent rhythm, the culture of the restaurant began to truly transform, not with colorful motivational posters on the wall, not with flashy customer-first campaigns, but through discreet, consistent, and sincere actions. A firmer handshake, a good morning, that came with eye contact, an apology given without shame, just because it needed to be said, an honest compliment at the end of a shift. A "how are you?" That wasn't automatic, it was real. Camila and Anna's philosophy, the one that seemed forgotten, buried under the weight of daily operations, began to re-emerge. But this time, it wasn't a top-down mandate. It grew from the inside out, rooted in people who had lived the transformation firsthand. And that's where the beauty of this story lives, because real change doesn't depend on structure, it depends on purpose. When actions start reflecting awareness, not scripts, the environment responds. The place comes to life. Customers began to notice. Some came back just to say, "Thank you." Others left notes, compliments, even small gifts. Children drew pictures. Elderly folks shared their memories. And what used to be just a snack bar became a space for listening, affection, and connection. Unknowingly, Daniel had prepared the ground for a new cycle. A cycle where each gesture would be a seed, where each story had space to bloom. And that was only the beginning. Have you ever walked into a place and felt that it held more than just walls and tables? That something invisible yet present lingered there? As if every gesture, every look, every word exchanged carried a deeper meaning? That's exactly what began happening in what used to be just another eatery, until it wasn't. This is one of those stories that are born from pain, but bloom into something far greater. And if you're here reading this, it's because you believe that respect is not just a detail, it's what turns the ordinary into the extraordinary. It all started with an episode of disrespect. Simple, cruel, quiet. A customer was ignored because she was dressed simply. The waiter, rushed and robotic, barely looked her in the eyes. He served her as if doing her a favor. The catch? That woman was one of the restaurant's owners, Camila. And that day marked a turning point. Camila didn't yell. She didn't fire anyone in a fit of rage. But she felt deep inside the blow of realizing that a place built with such care had become hostage to haste. And she decided not just to fix the mistake, but to reinvent the very purpose of the business. Alongside Anna, her partner and childhood friend, they began sketching ideas on a napkin. From there, something powerful emerged. The code of respect. This code wasn't crafted by a consultancy. It didn't come from an HR manual. It came from experience, from listening, from pain, and from hope. Every line written was a reminder. Listen with your eyes. Be kind for no reason. Treat each customer as a new story worth telling. There were no cold rules. There was soul. It was an invitation to presence, to warmth, to genuine listening. And little by little, the staff began to change. Not because they were forced to, but because they began to understand the impact of what they did. A snack wasn't just a snack. It was someone's break in a chaotic day. A coffee could be the only moment of peace for a tired mother. A simple, good morning, could lift someone on the verge of breaking down. Over time, a new idea was born. To create a living mural inside the restaurant. A space where customers could leave their thoughts, their stories, their feelings. And there, something magical began to happen. Children left crayon drawings. Elderly folks came back just to write letters. One young man wrote that he had been treated so kindly on a hard day that he canceled his plan to leave town. Every corner of the restaurant began to hold memories, as if the walls preserved the smiles, the hugs, the emotional glances. The mural became a meeting point. People who once rushed in and out now stopped, read, felt, and sometimes cried. The news spread. What was once just a snack bar became a reference. Hospitality schools started scheduling visits. Teachers brought full classes to hear Camila speak. And there, in front of the mural, she would explain, "You're not studying service. You're studying empathy. You won't just serve food, you'll serve presence." More than a business, that restaurant became a living organism, a space where stories weren't just welcome, they were celebrated, where every mistake became a lesson, where every success was shared, and most importantly, where no one was invisible. And now comes the question that changes everything. How much is that worth? How much is it worth to see a customer smile because they felt respected? How much to hear an employee say they finally feel proud of where they work? How much to build a culture that inspires other companies, other leaders, other worlds? Because when a company commits to people's stories, it stops chasing only financial profit. It begins building a different kind of wealth, a legacy. And that kind of profit, my friend, doesn't go into the cash register. It goes into the soul. Today the restaurant still stands, serving snacks, coffee, and meals. But anyone who walks through that door knows there's something different about this place. It's the way they look at you, the way they listen, the way they remember your name, even if you've only been there once. Many say it's luck, others, marketing. But those who know the story behind it know the truth. It's respect, it's intention, it's humanity. And it all started with one underestimated woman and one rushed waiter. Ironic? Maybe. But also a reminder. The greatest revolutions begin with the smallest gestures. And now I ask you, sincerely, and without filters, how have you been treating the stories that cross your path every day? I'm not talking about grand movie plots or books. I'm talking about real stories. The girl at the coffee counter, the guy at reception, the quiet coworker in your meeting. Have you been listening? Or just reacting on autopilot, treating people like part of your daily scenery? We live in a time where rushing is romanticized. Those who reply the fastest are praised as efficient. Those who never pause to breathe are seen as productive. But is that really respect? Or just carelessness dressed as efficiency? How many stories do we miss because we're too busy looking at our own schedules? And the worst part, sometimes we think we're being polite when we're only following a social script. A good morning without eye contact. A how are you? That doesn't wait for an answer. A thank you said out of habit, not gratitude. It's in those details that respect is revealed, or hidden, because respect isn't what you say, it's how you make others feel. Maybe without noticing you've been living inside a factory of rush, where every order is just a number, every person a demand, every day just another brick in the path to burnout. And the cruelest part? Little by little, we grow indifferent. The stories pass, the emotions fade, and life becomes a to-do list. But we weren't made to run on autopilot. We're built for affection, for presence, for connection. And that's exactly why the biggest transformations begin with the smallest gestures. A well done, spoken with sincerity. And I understand you said with true listening. A tell me about it, that gives someone space to feel seen. That's where the stories begin to bloom. Have you realized how many times you've judged someone by appearance, silence, or how they spoke? Have you ever thought that the irritated waiter might be grieving? That the distracted coworker could be battling anxiety? That the quiet old man might carry a lifetime of wisdom no one's asked to hear? These invisible stories are what shape the world, and it's only when we have the courage to truly see them that everything begins to change. But that takes a step, a gesture, a bit more presence, a bit less ego. Maybe it's time to revisit your own code of respect, to understand that empathy isn't about being nice, it's about being conscious, that politeness isn't formality, it's intention, that kindness isn't obligation, it's choice. Replace, "What's your order?" with, "How are you today?" Trade haste for presence, indifference for interest, because when we change the way we treat others, we transform the entire atmosphere, and that's how we create the stories that truly matter. And look, if you made it this far, something inside you has already awakened. Maybe it's discomfort, a desire to change, or even guilt for having ignored someone who needed to be heard. Doesn't matter. What matters is that this is your turning point. Because no story of transformation starts perfect, but all of them begin with one first step. So ride that impulse. Don't let it fade. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to see beyond the counter, beyond the name tag, beyond appearances. Because the best stories aren't just heard, They're lived, built brick by brick, gesture by gesture, and yours can start now. Are you ready?